This week, we're learning about an incredibly important concept in the field of ethnic studies, as well as women's gender and sexuality studies: intersectionality. This series of materials I'm having you read and watch this week all speak to one another in meaningful ways. And I hope you're seeing a connection not just among this week's materials, but across all of the readings and course content that you've been engaging with this semester. So, to start, let's review some background information on the Combahee River Collective. The Combahee River Collective, also known as the CRC, was a radical Black feminist organization formed in 1974. The name of the organization comes from Harriet Tubman's 1863 raid on the Combahee River in South Carolina, where she amazingly freed 750 enslaved people. Now, I say Black feminist organization because at this time, feminism as a movement was white dominated and primarily focused on the gender oppression of white women, leaving no room for Black women or women of color who navigated the world not only as women in a patriarchal society, but also as racialized women, meaning that they faced different and multiple oppressions at once. The CRC formed as a more radical alternative to the National Black Feminist Organization, which itself formed as an alternative to white feminist organizations, who the National Black Feminist Organization believed were failing to address racism in the United States. Yet neither the National Black Feminist Organization, which mobilized around racism, nor the white feminist organizations at the time who fought against sexism truly captured the double oppressions faced by Black women, nor the triple oppressions faced by Black lesbians. The CRC then was comprised primarily of Black lesbians who were determined to construct a more complete and more accurate plan of action, a plan that included a very sharp and intellectual, yet clear and cohesive statement that illuminated how their ideas would help Black women, Black lesbians, and other women of color to get free. In the eyes of the CRC, if Black women were free, everyone would be free, because it would necessarily mean that all systems of oppression, from sexism, racism, homophobia, classism, and more, were destroyed. The women of the CRC included Black feminist visionaries Barbara Smith, her sister Beverly Smith, Demita Frazier, and Audre Lorde, among other giants. While the CRC did not coin the term intersectionality, which was created by Kimberlé Crenshaw in 1989, the CRC put forth an analysis that encapsulated what the term means and how it's enacted in Black women's daily lives. Their statement articulated the idea that multiple oppressions, in this case, racism, sexism, and homophobia, reinforce one another, creating new modes of analysis for these interlocking systems of oppression. As Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor notes in her book, How We Get Free, Black Feminism and the Combahee River Collective, quote, the CRC described oppressions as interlocking or happening simultaneously, thus creating new measures of oppression and inequality. In other words, Black women could not quantify their oppression only in terms of sexism or racism or of homophobia experienced by Black lesbians. They were not ever a single category, but it was the merging or enmeshment of those identities that compounded how Black women experienced oppression, end quote. The Combahee River Collective statement outlined the birth or genesis of the Black feminist movement, their beliefs as an organization, the problems in organizing Black feminists, and Black feminist issues. For the CRC, getting free was not an academic exercise. They meant it literally. Their goal was to fight interlocking systems of oppression, and they weren't exclusionary in their attempts to meet this goal. In other words, while the white feminist movement argued for separatism from men to escape patriarchy, Black feminists invited Black men to join them. The problem was that at the time, the Black liberation movement was overwhelmingly dominated by Black men who were often quite sexist in their beliefs. Black male activists and organizers often opposed reproductive rights for women and did not allow women to take leadership roles in their movements. Women were not seen as equals in the eyes of Black men and were told that they were just naturally or biologically made different and were ultimately made to be subservient to men. The CRC invited Black men to join them, but they urged them to set aside their sexist and homophobic views for the good of collective Black liberation. However, they were met with resistance, as Black male activists and organizers of the time were very against feminism as an ideology. Most Black men in these activist movements, and unfortunately, this is still something that we see today, they believed that feminism was a distraction to divide Black men and women, and they believed Black women needed to stand by their men. They were especially unkind to lesbians who defied not only their supposed role as women in the male dominated organizations and movements, but also defied their role as sexual partners to men. You can see then how the CRC had so much working against them. Their white women and Black male allies were few and far between, even though their cause was ultimately to free everyone. In Boston, the CRC's headquarters, the CRC fought against the sterilization campaigns of Black and Brown women. And if you've never heard of this, do know that from 1950 to 1966, Black and Brown women were subject to forced sterilization policies in the United States, governmental campaigns that are well documented. The CRC also fought for abortion rights and advocated for women who were experiencing increasing struggles with domestic violence. Taylor notes that while not all of these new feminists who were fighting these social justice battles up and joined the CRC nevertheless, quote, opened up the world of organizing and radical politics to new Black feminists, end quote. The CRC was made up of Black feminist visionaries who changed the world. Their manifesto had far-reaching impacts, so much so that much of what they articulated in their statement is taken for granted in contemporary feminist politics. And if you're interested in learning more about Black feminism, I recommend reading the works of Patricia Hill Collins, Audre Lorde, and Kimberlé Crenshaw. And if you're interested in the amazing literary legacies of famous Black women authors, I highly recommend reading the works of Zora Neale Hurston, Alice Walker, Maya Angelou, and the absolutely phenomenal Toni Morrison. Her book, The Bluest Eye, changed my life. Rest in power, Toni Morrison. Now let's unpack what Kimberlé Crenshaw meant by the term intersectionality. So what does intersectionality mean? First, it was coined in 1989 to draw attention to Black women's compounded experiences with racism and sexism. Crenshaw is a lawyer and legal scholar who developed this concept to explain lawsuits in which Black women accused employers of discrimination. In the specific case she references in the TED Talk and in the longer 1989 article in which she originally put forth the term, a company was being sued because there were no jobs for which it was willing to hire Black women. But the company did hire Black men to work on the factory floor and white women to work as secretaries in the front of the office. So the company argued that it clearly didn't discriminate against Black people or women, and the court was unable to recognize how Black women faced unique forms of discrimination as Black women, even though they couldn't work on the factory floor because they were women, and they couldn't work in the front of the office because they were Black. Intersectionality, then, is a way of understanding the issues that the Combahee River Collective laid out. It's a way of thinking about identity and its relationship to power. It provides a way for understanding relationships among identities and explains that Black women face challenges at the intersection of Blackness and womanhood. Focusing only on race or gender just doesn't provide a way to address those unique issues. Intersectionality also provides a way for us to work across differences without disregarding them as if they don't matter. It's the only way to address the issues of the most vulnerable groups of marginalized people, those who occupy intersectional positions of oppression. As Crenshaw tells us, an intersectional perspective is important for marginalized groups to understand, because those groups are often working on behalf of a majority of its members. So for example, in the women's suffrage movement, they were fighting only for white women. The civil rights movement was primarily mobilized for cisgendered straight Black men and women. In the gay rights movement, they fought primarily for cisgendered gay men And in the immigrant rights movement, they often exclude anyone who isn't what they see as a hardworking, education seeking immigrant. The dominant members of marginalized groups, therefore, tend to prioritize their own interests, and in doing so, minimize the voices of those who experience intersecting forms of marginalization. In other words, women of color, queer Black folks, trans people of color, disabled migrants, etc. The concept of intersectionality has also been used to complicate identity in ways that provide a more nuanced perspective on privilege as well as on marginalization, allowing us to understand that identities are political, hence the phrase identity politics, which, like intersectionality and critical race theory, get taken up in highly problematic ways to the extent that they're stripped of their original meaning. So, some folks will use the concept of identity politics to talk about the ways in which men of color are privileged by their masculinity within a patriarchal system. Others will use this concept to argue that some white folks are marginalized, for example, by being gay or poor or disabled. These can be productive applications so long as they're not used to deny marginalization or privilege in any of these cases. Black men are still marginalized as Black in a racist society, even if they benefit from male privilege. White gay people, poor white people, disabled white people are still privileged as white in a racist society. Intersectionality and identity politics have been used and abused in much of mainstream media. But remember that it's incredibly important to view concepts historically, and in this case, historically. To truly understand a concept or theory, you must place it into context, learn its true meaning, and apply it to your life. Once you do, your worldview will broaden, your critical thinking skills will sharpen, and your newfound ability to analyze the world around you might lead you too to take up the CRC's cause for liberation from oppression. As the Combahee River Collective argued, if Black women are free, all of us are free.